All right, we're live to Facebook. See if you see it. Hello, technical difficulties. We'll be right with you.
Live.
Is it live?
Yes.
Good. All right, great. All right, well, let's, we got a couple people showing up. Let's wait, let's give it a minute for people to show up. Sorry, folks, we had some technical difficulty. The broadcast that we initially started a few minutes ago did not go live to Facebook as we had hoped. So we missed our little preamble, and for that reason, I'm going to give a couple minutes for guests to join us. We have somebody on YouTube and a couple people on Facebook, so that's good. Oh, excellent, Christine's here. Hi, Christine. Sorry about that little hiccup. And Gary's here. Hi, Gary. Good. We're live. So good. Cheers, everybody.
Cheers.
Another Monday Night Live. These
No,
weeks
it's the
just
first one.
fly by. No, it's like I think this is the 100th or something for us.
First one for me.
Yeah. So welcome. I'm gonna introduce our guests in just a moment. But as I always do at the beginning of the show, I just want to invite anybody who might be joining us for the very first time to please like our broadcast, subscribe to our YouTube channel or Facebook channel if you do like what you hear today, and please share this feed to your friends and family if you think there's people you know who might be interested in the topics that we talk about here on our Monday Night Live show. And if you are joining us, please make yourself known. If you just write a comment in your YouTube page or Facebook, your comment will be visible here and we'll know that you're here. And if you have questions of us or of Brad, our guest, during the show, please feel free to ask those questions in the comments, and we'll do our best to get to those questions during the show. If for some reason we can't get to the questions during the show, we'll do our best to answer them after the show is over. And I think that covers it. So again, welcome everybody. We have a few people on because of our little hiccup. We might take a few minutes for everybody who intended to join to come on, but that's okay. Matt's here. I don't know. I wonder if Matt's still in Europe.
From Europe?
Matt, let us know. Are you back from Europe?
Maya saw Gary the other day at Moulton Farms.
Excellent. Yeah. Well,
So
Gary's
we
here
can-
with us. Cheers, Gary. We're here today with Brad Chase, and Brad and I met about, I don't know, was that probably 9 months
October.
ago?
October.
What's that? October. Okay. That's right. It was connected to a special event for you.
Yep,
So
our anniversary.
yes. So it just so happened that Brad was traveling through New Hampshire and had heard good things about Hermit Woods, and folks had suggested he might want to come up and try some of our wines, which he made the choice to do. And it just so happened on the day that he chose to visit us, I was here in the tasting room and got a chance to meet Brad and learn a little bit about Brad's background, and learned that Brad was in the wine industry as well, and a part of the industry that has always intrigued me. And so we had a lot to talk about. We had a lot in common, and we shared wines for a few hours that day, or an hour or so that afternoon. And since then, Brad's joined our club and participated in some of our wine events here. Recently, the Petit Bleu vertical tasting, which we're...
Very tasty.
Thank you. And that's actually the winning wine from that event is
Yeah.
the wine that we decided to drink today. This is tell us about that, Ken.
Yeah, this is the 2017 vintage of Petit Bleu Reserve. And when we did the vertical tasting, we sampled some older wines, versions of Petit Bleu and Blue, and talked about different approaches to getting as much as we could out of the berries and crafting the wines. And then 17 was the oldest official Petit Bleu Reserve under that label. And we had a 17, an 18, a 19, 20, 21, and a 21 Stoneface barrel age vintage of Petit Bleu Reserve with a group of 10 or 15 people down in the cellar. It's a nice afternoon.
That was a fun event. I really
It was.
enjoyed
It was
that.
good.
That
Yeah.
worked out really well. And everybody seemed to really like this 17 vintage, so I thought I'd reduce our library by one more bottle.
Everybody wants you to go back in time and make more so they can buy it now.
Yeah. It's one of those things, right? It's like a like a musical event or whatever. It happens once. You know, brokering wines, there's certain vintages, certain things that everything comes together and you get a unique product, and it doesn't always happen again.
Right. So let's get into the conversation. So as I said, Brad was in the wine industry for a number of years. How many years did you run your business?
7, I guess.
7 years.
8, something
What was
like
the name
that.
of it again?
Highland Wine Merchants.
Highland Wine Merchants. And you brought wines essentially from around the world to customers here in New Hampshire.
That's
in
correct,
New
yep.
Hampshire Liquor Store. And did you just go through the liquor store? I think.
No, actually, most of my business was not through the liquor store.
Okay.
So most of it was working with the independent shops
Oh,
and
good.
With restaurants and some wines through the liquor store, but mostly the
Taste wines and pick great wines and bring those to chefs and restaurants and
well, I decide
people.
almost every morning I'm going to go taste great wines, but it's
Before we get into how you made that final decision and decided to open up your own company, let's go back a little further. What brought you to that place? So where did you grow up? Where are you
so
originally from?
I spend most of my life in New Hampshire.
Okay.
Different parts of the state. Mostly, we spent a lot of time in the seacoast, and some in the south central, and some more in the mid part of the state at different points in my life. And as I was growing up, our family we're not particularly big wine drinkers. We would have some bubbles on the holidays, and
Like
wine.
a lot of families,
Yeah,
right?
right. Like a lot of families. Well, of course, I find that for a lot of people my age, my parents' generation was oftentimes mixed drinkers, cocktail drinkers.
Cocktails.
And my father loved a Manhattan, for example. And interestingly enough, it skipped a generation, and my daughter is a bourbon fiend. But and so when I was in college, I drank beer, I drank cocktails, I drank wine, I drank a little bit of everything. And the first job I had out of school is I had to go to Germany for a month to do a system installation. I was a software engineer at the time.
Okay.
And we were, perhaps 20 minutes from the Mosel River Valley. And so on my days off, I did other things, but I spent many of my days off going to wineries on the Mosel River Valley and trying the wines, because Rieslings were some of the wines I'd liked, and I liked a lot of wines in Germany. I liked so many wines I had to buy another suitcase to bring them home. and that's kind of what started this. And then just as life went on, I had opportunities to visit different wine producing regions, both in the U.S. and internationally. And
Traveling as a
right.
guest or a customer.
traveling for business. So
For your
For-
software engineer business.
software engineer, and then later on marketing and sales.
Okay.
And I worked in several different industries.
But not as a wine.
But not as a wine,
not
right?
wine,
No.
yeah.
So, but if you've done business travel, if you can't find a way to have fun at it, it's going to kill you.
Yeah.
So one of the ways I had fun at it was when there was opportunity to go taste wine, I'd go taste wine, and so I got to taste lots of different wines in lots of different places, and just kind of expand my palate and try different stuff, and build up kind of a fundamental knowledge of wine from different regions. And then several years ago, just about, a little before I started the business actually, but the big stepping stone was I was at a point with my other careers where it was a good time to make a change.
Mm-hmm.
And as you've experienced, when I'm in a tasting, I ask a lot of questions. I get into a discussion about the wine and how is this made, and what's the aging, and just lots and lots of questions. And there was a very nice wine shop in our town that had tastings quite frequently, and they had good tastings and good wines, and I used to go down there, and I would do the same thing to all the people showing up there. But the ones that would be best would be either the owners of the import owner, the import business owners, or the winemakers or things like that, because then I could really grill them about the
Right.
same things you want to grill me about. Is why did you do this? How did you do that?
Right.
Where is this from? Why? And there was one importer that I saw fairly regularly over a period of a few months. And one day we're just having this conversation we're actually talking about a Vino Noble, and he goes, "Would you like to help me sell wine in New Hampshire?" And I said, "That was a good time to make a change." I said, "Sure." I'll try that.
Wow.
And off we went.
So you actually started with another, working for somebody else.
Right. Working, and what happened is the brokerage business grew out of that because to make the better money in New Hampshire, you need to have your own, you need to have your own licenses. So you don't have to pay fractions to other people for doing the work. And things just kind of took off from there.
Before this happened, did you ever have any professional training or pursue any education in wine knowledge or wine tasting, or take
No.
the SOM or master taster kind of program?
No, I learned the wine the way most people do. I just drank a lot of it.
Yeah. Well, that's what I tell people. The best way is to practice.
Yeah,
And there's the worst things to practice at.
Nobody's born knowing anything about wine. You have to learn it. So
Yeah.
you just try it. You find what you like.
It's interesting because what you're sharing is a very similar path that I went through. I lived in California for 11 years, and my wife and I really enjoyed, whenever we traveled, seeking out interesting places to visit on the wine side, finding wineries, and of course there was an abundance of them in California, something like 4,000 or 5,000 of them.
You've got a few choices.
Yeah, so I had visited hundreds of wineries. I never thought I'd be in the industry, but I loved learning about it. I loved digging in on the wines and talking about them and learning about them. So it's a similar path. I never would have expected when I moved from California to New Hampshire that I would have been getting into the wine business.
Most people wouldn't.
Yeah, exactly. So you took a job as a wine merchant working with another importer, and then gradually got your licenses and began doing your own importing of wines.
So the first step is get the licenses to do business in New Hampshire, and we won't get into all the details, but there are basically two you need to be able to deal with the state and handle wines in New Hampshire, and we got those. And I did that in conjunction with this importer, though you need to be a state resident to get one of them. So anyway, we did that, and then as I started to branch out, he was focused on Italian wines, and I wanted to branch out to offer a wider range of wines, and so I started looking for other opportunities, other chances to bring in wines, working with other importers, and eventually I had the opportunity. I found some wines that nobody imported and I really wanted to bring in, so that was when I then got my federal import permit and went through all of that so I could bring those wines in, and one thing just led to another.
So how much of that early stage was involving you actually going out and visiting wineries, or were you just having to make connections and bring wines in to sample here?
So actually most of the first, I had the starter set of Italian wines that the importer I worked with carried. So he had a nice selection of wines. It was a good place to start. And then most of them, the early selections I found in two places. One was going to the Boston Wine Expo, which no longer exists, unfortunately, but it was unless they've started it back up.
I think they did.
Did they start it back up?
We got notice this year to attend the Boston Wine Expo.
Then that's
it's back and going.
That's new, and that's nice. It was actually a great venue, and then as I got into it, and I got invited to an event. It's basically speed dating for the wine industry. That's exactly what it is. You go out to this event. It's a hosted event. They cover some of your expenses for getting there, not all of them, but a big chunk of them. And you spend 3 days in a hotel with a whole bunch of either importers or wineries and a whole bunch of other people in the industry, and you get these 30-minute sessions. You book all day. You book probably 10 or 15 a day.
Wow.
There are some educational sessions, some presentations. There's a lunch, there's a dinner.
Where was this?
This one was in Chicago, and
The Wine Center.
but that's but it's geographically
It's in the center of the country.
It's
Yeah.
easy for a lot of people to get to. So it was a great event, but I tasted 220 wines in 3 days, something like that.
Wow.
But out of that, I found a lot of wines that I ended up bringing in. And like I said, most of those, I actually found other importers for. It was Boston Wine Expo, which is the thing that led to me getting the import license, because I tasted some wines down there, and it's just like, these are great. How do I get them?
That's interesting, because you and Chuck, before we even opened the winery, you guys went to the Boston Wine Expo.
Yeah.
And I remember you came back really
Yeah.
enthused by what you learned from that.
Now, did you
Yeah.
go to the trade hours or to the public hours?
Were you there with
We got in early somehow. We're like an hour early.
was it with Gus? Did you you were
I
connected
don't-
with, I think Gus got
maybe
you in.
Gus got Chuck in and I tagged along.
Because Gus has an import company, I
Okay.
think I shared with
Yeah.
you, and we've known Gus for
Maybe
years.
that's where it was. And Kevin Sorelli was giving a little presentation on how to come up and taste different wines and different things, and it was a good event.
Yes, it was a great event, but I loved going trade hours, which, sorry everybody, but the trade hours was like 3 hours when it's not crowded, and
Right, that was in the beginning,
right,
right?
right.
Before anybody
Before,
gets
it's like 10 to 1,
Right.
and then they open the doors to everybody at
Right.
1, and
Right,
then
we could go to a couple of the key ones that everybody's gonna swamp, and we got to go there and sample.
So you were there
Right.
during trade hours too?
Yeah, we must
Yeah.
have been. You know.
And there are some bottles that they've got a very limited supply
Yeah.
of, that you'll get either during the trade hours, or if you get there early during the public hours, they'll share it. But
Right.
they're only going to open 1 or 2 of these $100 bottles. And,
Right, exactly.
after that, it's sorry, you're getting the $30 bottle, which is
Right.
still very nice.
Because
but,
then the drink theft is going on.
well,
in
and
public.
that is unfortunately what it does turn into to some extent. But yeah, I found a lot of really good wines there. I found an importer of French and Lebanese wines there that I did a lot of business with over the years. She actually chose very good wines, and and then you just find them. And then later on, I started going to wineries and hey, these are pretty good. Can I get these in New Hampshire?
So that's interesting. So you work with importers of import. So there are importers who bring in wines nationally that you then may have relationships with to find wine. So that you don't necessarily have to go to Italy or have to go to France. You just have to make good connections with an importer who's bringing a good volume of those wines into the country, and they might be anywhere in the U.S.
And and the fact of the matter is for a small business, it's much easier to do it that way.
Sure,
Because
it's costly to travel the world.
right, the shipping, ignoring what happened a couple of years ago, but with shipping costs. But even then, it's much more cost effective to be able to fill a container than to just ship one pallet. You can just ship one pallet,
Sure.
Yeah.
and you can still do it and make money at it. But yeah, so most of the big importers, they fill containers and bring them over, and they deal with all the headaches. And there are lots of headaches with doing the import stuff.
That you didn't have to deal with because
Right, but-
most of
but-
your
but they-
wines-
But they take their cut.
They take their cut,
Yeah.
exactly. So, you have to remember before the winery gets to somebody out there drinking the wine, the winery has to make money. The shipping company has to make
long
money.
chain, isn't it?
Right, yeah, it's just, there are layers and layers and layers, and people wonder, they go to Italy, or they go to France, and they go down and they get this
€6.
fabulous bottle of wine for €5, €6, maybe even less sometimes, if they're just getting it, at the winery, and they say, well, why can't I get this? Or they find it at home and they go, why is this $30?
Yeah.
And that's because there's this whole line of people between where you got it and
have
where
to
you're
be
getting it
paid.
here that have to make a living, and it does
That's what
add up.
happened
So-
when we went to South Africa and had just incredible Chenin Blanc and other wines, and very, very inexpensive. And here in the States, and some of the people we spoke to did have a distribution to the States, to Europe. And of course, the prices would go way, 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 way up because of all the steps along the way to move it all the way from South Africa up to Europe or to the west coast of the United States. It was just,
Well, it's why we learned that so few South African wines. We were just amazed at how many wineries were producing amazing wine in South Africa, and
So
very
few
few of
make
them
it
were
here.
ever.
And I'm amazed at how little of it actually makes here.
yeah,
Right.
So
little.
I used to not care for South African wines very much, and I still don't for what we can get in this country as a
Right,
general rule.
right.
But then I had opportunity actually in Europe to try some, and I'm like, these are pretty good. Why don't these get over to the U.S.?
Right,
But
right.
There's a relation,
Yeah,
and
we
we
had some-
learned a little bit
we
about
had
that
some
because we
tremendous
connected
wines
with
there.
some winemakers there who talked a lot about that. And all the winemakers we talked to, we'd say, are you in the U.S.? No, we deal with Europe. That's their market. And of course, the Europeans have been dominating South Africa for hundreds of years, so in various ways, some more positive than others. But there's a long-standing relationship between the Europeans and the Dutch and the French and we remember when we were there, we did this
The history.
piece where there was a live action video that
It's a
showed
time-lapse.
the various countries that had
Denmark ran it for a while. Now
yeah,
Belgium's
who
running it.
ran
Germany's
parts of
doing it.
Africa
France has
over
got
the
it.
years. It is fascinating.
Spain is taking over.
And it
this
wasn't
thing.
until like 50 years ago that Africa started to become Africa and actually managed
true.
to buy Africa. Yeah. So yeah, a lot of the great wines were going to Europe because we were really impressed.
Oh, it was great. It was incredible. When you bring these wines in, everything has to go through our state liquor store, right?
in New Hampshire, yes.
In New Hampshire. Yeah. So everything comes through there, and then
Well, it has to go through the hands of the Liquor Commission. So it doesn't have to go through the store,
okay.
but it
It
has to.
doesn't have to go to their
the-
warehouse.
But it has,
warehouse.
but it has to all go through the warehouse.
It has to go through the warehouse. Okay.
One of their two warehouses, and yes, everything. So the way it works in New Hampshire is that you sell the wine to the state, and then if you have a business like mine where you're selling to the independent wine shops or the restaurants, you go out and sell the wine for the state, because the wine shops and the restaurants have to buy it out of the state
From the
warehouse,
state liquor store.
or from the liquor store or from the warehouse. If they buy by the case, they can order it casefuls directly from, actually you can even order partial cases for some things directly from the warehouse. But then they're responsible for the cost of transporting it from the warehouse to their business.
Okay.
And what many of the restaurants do, for example, is they once a week place their order, and then somebody drives up, fills up the back of an SUV, and that's all their alcohol for the week, their wines, their spirits,
Yeah.
everything, into the back of the SUV, and they take it down to the restaurant,
Straight out of the warehouse.
straight out of the warehouse. But then they get a better discount doing that,
Right.
or they get they get some advantages doing that,
Sure.
depending on
Well,
what they're
the
doing.
liquor commission doesn't have to send that wine all over the state before
So
they get
it's
it.
actually a bigger advantage for wine than it is for spirits, but but yeah, some of the places do that. Some of the places just go down and buy the bottles straight out of the
public.
liquor stores.
Right.
Yeah.
A lot of
Specific
places do. I've
Yeah, a lot of
witnessed
restaurants, a lot of
local
places.
restaurants many times filling their carts up
Yeah.
with wine for the weekend.
Right. Well, if you're going to be if you're going to go through a lot of wine, it may make sense to go to the warehouse. But if you're only going to go through, half a dozen bottles of each selection, no, it doesn't make sense. It makes sense to go down, because then you don't have to keep the inventory. You
Sure.
actually, you don't have to deal with the
You don't have to store
transportation.
it.
You just go get it. And actually, the state has a thing where you can go to your local store and order cases out of the warehouse, and they won't get their restaurant discount, but they won't pay shipping, and it'll just come on the next truck that goes to that store.
Right.
They'll just they pay the full list price, but it shows up, and if the volume is small enough, it makes good sense for them to do that.
So I've always been curious on the restaurant side, and maybe you know the answer to this, maybe you don't, but it seems like there are some restaurants that have some pretty specialized wine lists, and if you enjoy the wines from that list, you don't necessarily get to buy them from the state stores. They're not always available, or at least that's the impression I get.
But they had to have come through the state.
Right.
They come through the warehouse.
They come from the warehouse.
But it doesn't mean they ended up in the store.
Doesn't mean they went in the store.
Okay. So
Right, so
they're-
there is a difference. Well, for example, not all your wines are available in the state stores, right?
Correct.
Well, that's true for like all the wines. Is if you want to get a product, it's probably easier for you because you're an in-state producer and they have some easier rules on some of this stuff. But if you want to get a wine into the state stores, you have to go through a secondary approval process. You have to go through a registration process to be able to have it in the state at all. But then once you have that, then you can sell it out, to people through the state,
Directly.
out of the warehouse. But to get it into the state store, because the state stores are only so big, even though some of them are very big, but there's way more wine than would fit into any one state store.
Right.
And so, you have to go through a different process to get the wines into the stores. And the same is true with the spirits. You have to, if you want to get spirits in the state stores, you have to go through, actually for spirits, you have to go through a test market to do it.
So it's theoretically, and maybe there's companies that do this, I don't know, but theoretically you could create a wine import company that imported wines that never ended up in the consumer's hand via the standard liquor store system, because you sold them, you brought them into the state and sold them directly to restaurants or specialty wine shops, so that those wine shops and restaurants can have something unique that is not available to the regular or general public.
And that's exactly what happens. And in fact, most of the independent wine shops avoid the wines that are in the state stores.
Of course.
Right.
Because they can't compete with
They
the price.
can't compete with the price.
Right, and then we don't need to go into all the details of why that's true, but.
Well,
but
it's
that-
obvious why it's true, right? I mean, there's a whole nother, like you said, all these people that have to get paid.
But, so so the advantage is you go to the independent shop, you're more likely to get free tastings. And they will taste through, over time, they will taste through their entire selection, whereas the tastings that get scheduled in the state stores those are scheduled by the brokers. So it's
Right.
whatever product they want to sell that month, not the product that the store wants to sell or that people have necessarily expressed an interest in. It's whatever product the broker wants to sell, which is fine. It's still a tasting. But at the independent shops, they're more likely, as they bring in new products, they will taste through them, and you'll get opportunities to try some wines that you probably wouldn't get a chance to try any other way. You're not going to get to try them in the state stores. You might get to try them, in a restaurant. You might find them, but even then, not that many restaurants are going to serve the better wines by the glass. There are a handful of restaurants that do, but the economics of it are prohibitive. I mean, most people aren't willing to pay enough for a glass of wine to be able to open a $50 bottle of wine and pour it by the glass.
Right.
It's just the way it works.
So your company, what percentage of wines did you move through the standard liquor store system, and what percentage did you bring in as specialty items that you dealt directly with restaurants or wine shops?
It was probably 75 to 80% was specialty shops and restaurants.
Really?
Yeah,
Oh, wow.
with the majority.
Wow.
There were,
So just a small amount then.
I had a handful. I mean, it depends on whether you're going to talk bottle volume or dollar volume to a little bit, and I'd have to go look at the computer.
Yeah, no, and
But
that's not so important,
the vast majority was not through the state stores. I had some products that got very successful in the state stores and did quite well, but mostly no.
And that was a choice you made.
It's partly a choice I made. It's partly because I'm not dealing with the big names. Pick any wine that everybody knows, a national brand. I'm not handling those. I was a little guy.
Yeah.
So there are different companies, bigger companies that handle these much better known wines. I was going after wines that I thought were good wines at a good price, but not necessarily well known. In fact, most of my producers, if in any of the cases I worked directly with the wineries, I worked with a lot of wineries that they only produce 5,000 cases a year.
So I'm glad you brought that up, because I talk about this. We do tours here all the time, and I talk about the fact that 95% of all the wineries in the world produce less than 5,000 cases. That's sort of the magic number for craft wine production. And if you travel the world and visit wineries, that's what you're going to find with most of them. They're making less than that. And of course those wines aren't going to be found very far from home, because of the cost to transport them and the cost to make them at that scale.
There's no economy of scale, so they're not distributing those wines all over the place.
They can, and if they're good enough, they get around. But even then, if the winery only makes 5,000 cases, you're going to be lucky if 500 show up in the U.S.
Right, right.
And that's so 500 cases over 50 states. That's 10 cases per state. You do the math. You're just not going to find those wines.
That's right. And so what percentage of wines did you bring into the market that represented that category, smaller than 5,000 case craft wineries?
I don't know, that small, probably about 25% of my business.
That's still a big number.
Yeah, I mean, I found a handful of different wineries. I found them different ways. They were small. Most of the international ones would be bigger, though, even though a lot of those were not huge. I mean, there were, I had products from some wine producers that were very big wine producers.
Sure.
But they, I would say I had a lot of the international ones were, tens of thousands of cases. So probably, somewhere between 20 and 60,000 cases.
Sure.
A nice size opera, not huge, not hundreds of thousands by any means. And then some that were bigger, but in the U.S., I actually worked with a lot of wineries that were smaller. And, there was a Washington winery I worked with that they were pretty big. They probably, my scale, they probably made 30,000 cases of wine a year. But there were wineries that were really 5,000, sometimes less.
It's an area that's been interesting to me because we've always talked about, we have some unique wines here that aren't available anywhere else in the world. And we've always thought, wouldn't it be great if we could find a relationship with somebody who cared about bringing wines that are different or wines that are unique into their restaurant in New York or San Francisco or one of the bigger markets in I always say, pinprick fashion. So how would we connect with a wholesaler who would be okay with dealing with 10 or 20 cases of Hermit Woods wine to bring to the city, and Boston or New York or whatever city it might be. And I know that this goes on. We have a relationship, Gideon Beanstalk has a winery. He makes 800 cases of wine a year. He's in the Sierra Nevada mountains. He's been making wine for 50 years. He's got some fame. He's well known. He was connected with a much larger Renaissance winery, which was a pretty famous winery for years in that area. He was the head winemaker. But he broke off and did his own thing. And his wines are available in restaurants in New York and San Francisco in very small quantities, obviously. And I have no idea how that works. But I'm impressed by his wines. They're beautiful, and people pay top dollar for them.
Yeah.
But
Well, in New Hampshire, if a restaurant wants to carry a specific winery's wines, it is now possible that they can order a case or two direct from the winery.
Really?
And pay for the shipping. They pay for the, but yeah, you can. It's possible to do it.
Without a distributor in between?
Right, because yes, it is possible to do it.
Wow. So what about the other way? Is it possible for
It's going to depend on the state.
Every state's different.
Yeah, that's one of the challenges. Every state is different.
Every state is different. It is a major challenge.
California is probably one of the easy ones. But, it's possible to do. And even, so in places that are big wine markets, so California, Washington, D.C., New York, Florida, you can probably find a distributor in some of those places. There'll be specialty distributors that would be willing to handle wines at a pallet at a time. So that's typically 56 cases. So they could, if it was a wine was good enough, remarkable enough, they could just ship a single pallet in.
Yeah.
You can actually do less than a pallet if the wine is pricey enough so there's enough margin in there.
Sure.
You can do less than a single pallet. I mean, some of my more expensive wines, I ended up shipping partial pallets because I could afford to do it.
Right. That's interesting. Well, it's a nut I want to crack someday here. I want to figure out how to get there, and it's not majorly high on the priority list. There's so many other things we're working on, but it would be, people come in from around the world and try our wine and are amazed by what's happening here. There's something very different going on here that's not going on anywhere else.
The path between here and there for you is to ask those people, probably the easy way is to ask them what restaurant near your house would feature these wines. Right. And then when you have that answer, then you go to that restaurant and you say, where do you get your wines?
And try and find the relationship with their distributor.
Right, because so even, in New Hampshire it's a little bit of a special case because being a control state and some of all the relationships there. But the same is actually true in most states, that There are big distributors that handle national products, so the big brand names, the ones you all know and you see in the big end caps at the stores.
Sure.
But there are oftentimes distributors who specialize in one niche or another, whether it's organic wines or wines from this region or higher quality wines. I mean, they have whatever slant they want to take on the market, and they frequently deal with lower volume producers and lower volume wines. And they make their business out of that because, like as I did with mine, the other side of the equation is that when people come to me or when they look at my wines, they know what they're getting. They know, gee, if Brad likes this, it's probably worth tasting. If this other distributor or importer or whoever likes this wine, well, I've liked a lot of the stuff they carry. I'll try this.
Right.
So,
How many wineries that getting back out to the companies you were doing business with? How many wineries can you think of, if any, would be like us that you had a special relationship with?
you guys are unique.
Well, and I don't, we're unique in many ways, for sure. I don't mean like us in the wine that we make, but like us in the scale. We're a very small winery. So how many, or if any, wineries did you have relationships with in other parts of the world, other parts of this country or the world, that you took a keen interest? Like, there's something special going on in this little shop over here in California or in France or in Italy or whatever, and you made it a point to bring that to the market because you were.
There were, I don't know, 3, 4, 5, maybe a few more. But I mean, I could name a handful right off the bat that were smaller wineries that just weren't known here at all, and then one mid-sized one that still wasn't known here at all that I found them and I said, yeah, I like these wines, I'm going to bring them in.
And did you have relationships with those wineries, or did those all go through secondary brokers?
All this, well, so I can't speak for all the import wines, because I actually think that some of the import wines were fairly small producers as well.
Sure.
And I can think of some of the Italian wines that I handled at different times that they were wines that importer had gone and dug up from a smaller producer, but I don't know those details as intimately. I know there were a handful of different wineries that I found directly one way or another, and just, yeah, these are worth it, let's bring them in.
But you still went through a secondary source to...
No. So if it's in the U.S., it was no big deal.
Direct.
Right. In U.S., I bought from the winery, sold to the state.
Okay. Right.
The state sold to the shops in New Hampshire, and I did that. And particularly, there were 3 Washington State wineries I worked with. That one was kind of mid-sized, the other 2 pretty small. There was one fairly small California winery I worked with. Internationally, most of the time, yeah, it would have been because somebody else had already found them. But there was one that I found, and like I said, that's the one where I got the import permits, and I said, I want to bring these wines in. And there were actually a handful of other wineries that, had I continued with the business, they were also on my list of ones that I wanted to import. But,
How do you keep up with sort of the trends and styles and things what people are looking for? I mean, it must be interesting to navigate this sort of flow. New things come on. All of a sudden, everybody wants, Alsatian whites or something, or they want Washington Pinot, or it's something happens, and
so let's start with that. Trends being trends. The fact of the matter is that the majority of the wine buying public wants the same stuff they've always wanted. The people who are out there on the trendy edge aren't necessarily that numerous. And, a good case in point is natural wines.
Yeah.
Which, I have tasted some fabulous natural wines, but there aren't that many people buying them. And there aren't that many people who, care enough. Some trends take off bigger. I'm glad that Americans have discovered dry rosés. There actually are some lovely dry rosés. But even then, you know, a lot of consumers' tastes don't change in a big hurry, and they find something they like and they stick with that. But then you come up with something else, and I'll make a very generic but fairly accurate distinction. Is a lot of people are very interested in rosés from Provence, but they completely ignore rosés from Italy. And there are some delightful rosés from Italy, but
Sure.
a lot of people just
The
don't even
wonders
look.
of marketing.
Yeah.
Well,
You know, and the wonders of getting a good review someplace, and you know,
sure, but at the same time, I talk about this a lot as well with our guests, but a vast majority of wines consumed in the U.S. is Chardonnay, Cabernet, and Merlot.
Mhm.
That's the lion's share of wines, and it just, I mean, it drives me nuts. I can't imagine what it must be like for importers who are trying to come up with something unique or different, or bring something different
Well,
to
they
the
want to
table.
bring in a good Cabernet.
Yeah.
A
But
good
the- but the-
Chardonnay.
but now-
Something that's at that price
I
point,
guess.
with that label, with that flavor.
but now you're
Yeah.
back to the advantage of working with the independent wine shops and the restaurants, is because I'm working with a group that is interested in different things, and they care less about, you know, the particular label than, or the particular grape than, is it a good wine?
Yeah.
And their customers are usually open to good wines from different regions. And so, you know, for example, I had some wines from Lebanon that were just fabulous.
Sure.
People, Lebanon? Really? Yeah, try the wine.
Yeah.
And you know, there's a lot of people who, so it's easy, and this is, of course, one of the things that's very American as well, is that we get focused on varietals.
Yeah.
But if
Right.
you go to France,
It's not blends.
there's no varietal name on that bottle label. You're
Right.
not going to find it.
Right.
If you know the wine laws, you can make a pretty good guess about what's in there. But and one of my favorite things is if you've watched the movie Sideways. And,
Sure.
Who hasn't?
Yeah.
all right, and so the
Merlot
main
went down.
character is castigating Merlot throughout the movie.
Yeah.
We can't
Effing
repeat the
Merlot.
words. Yes. But then one of the jokes in it is at the end of the movie he raves. I mean, absolutely raves about a right bank Merlot. A right bank Bordeaux. What's going to be in that?
Yeah.
Oh, it's going to be mostly Merlot.
Yeah.
It's, and
So, did you ever find yourself getting caught up in the fact that the American drinker wants Chardonnay, Merlot, and Cabernet? Did you find yourself leaning into that at all, or did you just say, "Well, I don't really care. I'm going to get the wines that I enjoy"?
Yes and no. I mean, so I picked wines that I thought people would enjoy. And
You still have to sell them.
you still have to sell them, but again, now we're back to the advantage of working with the small shops.
There you go.
And working with the restaurants, and you know, you get a restaurant, and the restaurant, you know, okay, I like this wine, I can sell this. And you know, restaurants that really focus on wine,
If they want to sell it, they can.
well,
Sure, that's how they make their money.
You train your staff, and
Yeah.
and it's actually a great way to go to a restaurant like that knows wine and knows it well, and instead of you picking the wine, say, here's what I want to have for dinner. What wine would you recommend?
Right.
Right.
And you know, you're gonna and don't steer them. Let them tell you.
Yeah.
And it's, you know, if you want to have some questions about why do you recommend this, why do you think those are valid questions, but don't just sit there and say, well, gee, I'm having steak, so I want to have Cabernet. Listen to the guy who's telling you about
Right.
the wine, or the woman who's telling you about the wine, and maybe you'll learn something. And this has even happened to me in the business. In you know, I had tasted a lot of different wines from around the world, but now I'm in the position of having to pick wines, and I'm going to, like I said, the event where I tasted 220 wines in 3 days. But I'm going to a lot of events where I'm tasting a lot of different wines, and I have people pitching different wines to me. I discovered a lot of wines that I like that I never knew about before,
Sure.
because I'm getting exposed to a broader variety of wines.
Yeah.
So and that's really the big thing. It's just people open your eyes up, open your taste buds up, try the other wines.
Yeah.
So that brings to point a really good question I have. Before I do that, a guest just asked, where did they get Lebanese wines? Can you get them in New Hampshire?
Well, you can get Chateau Monsieur, whatever there's the famous one, which is a very different style of wine, and some people, you either like it or you don't like it.
But it's available in the New Hampshire liquor
That is
stores?
available in the New Hampshire liquor stores. The one I used to carry is no longer, because, at least as far as I know, because there's nobody carrying it.
Sure.
But you can mail order.
Sure.
I know places where you can mail order and have it shipped.
So maybe we'll get back to that customer with an after the show response.
So that particular person who put the question is, yes, what I would say is, let's have a private response, and I
Yeah.
can tell you who to contact. I can tell you what the wine is that I would recommend,
Great.
and who to contact about where to find it.
So back to the restaurant question. This is always interesting to me, and especially in my more novice years, I would be more afraid of this. But I always feared when I'd go into a restaurant and I'd have a meal and I'd say, "What would you recommend with it?" That the restaurateur is going to come back with their most expensive wine. And am I getting the best wine for this meal, or am I getting upsold?
Or they're getting,
to-
they want to get rid of something.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, so from your perspective, where would you fall on that? Is that a concern I should be worried about? And I guess it depends on the restaurant I'm eating
Depends
at.
on the restaurant.
It depends on the restaurant, but, there are some restaurants, so a restaurant, if you are a wine lover,
Mhm.
you can sit down in a restaurant, look at their wine list, and make a pretty good guess
Yes,
how engaged that restaurant is with wine.
yes.
Um,
Because the list is filled with Merlots, Cabernets, and Chardonnays.
You get some of the basics,
Right,
the
right,
ones
right,
that you see
Kendall
all the
Jackson
time.
and
one of my favorite battles was Pinot Grigio, but that's, so if you look at that wine list and you go, wow, there's some interesting stuff on here. I don't even know all of these.
that's great advice.
Yeah.
Then I'd be inclined to trust them, because if they've put in, especially in New Hampshire, where
Right.
it's hard work to do this. It's much harder for a restaurant
Right.
to do it in New Hampshire than it is in
New York
other
City or
states. Yeah.
something,
If they put in that much work in New Hampshire, I'd give them the benefit of the doubt. Now, if you get a bad experience, you get a bad experience. But that's true.
Sure.
That's true with going to a restaurant in the
true,
first place. I mean,
yeah.
you can go to a restaurant everybody raves about, and you can get a horrible meal and go,
terrible,
why is everybody raving? But
That's great advice. I like.
That makes sense.
Yeah, I hadn't thought about it that
There's
way.
some you walk in and you look at the menu and it's
It's
like
obvious.
the same
I
wine
mean,
menu
you-
you've seen everywhere else. They're
There's a-
getting it from the same big group that's pushing their portfolio that checks all the boxes for the general public.
Yeah.
And that's what they sell. And then you find those other small, eclectic, unique places and you get this long list of wines from different areas. You're like, wow, I never even heard of that.
you've got at least one restaurant like that in this area, because where we had our dinner that night in October, I took one look at their wine list and I go, oh,
Well, let's
These-
spread some love. Who is this?
the Squam Lake Inn.
I love this one.
And I took one look at their wine list. I go, these guys care about wine. I mean,
Oh, yeah.
they've got a couple of the greatest hits on there because you kind of have to, but they had some really kind of offbeat and eclectic selections.
That's great.
And I was just like, and in that particular case, I knew the wines well enough. I said, I want that and that. But that is a wine where I would talk to the people there and say, and we actually did. They gave us a couple of samples, a couple of different wines as we were
Sure.
choosing through them. I would be willing to put myself in their hands and say, what do you want to have? What do I want to have with this dish?
That's good to know. And it's one of my favorite restaurants in the area. So I would-
One of the other
do that.
telltales is when you ask, what do you recommend? And you need to be a little careful with this, but oftentimes you're going to get back, well, what do you like?
Sure.
Mm-hmm.
And if all they're looking for is whether it's a checkbox Chardonnay or Sauvignon Blanc, well, that's not very helpful. But if they kind of get a little deeper into it and say, well, do you like this kind of Cabernet or that kind of Cabernet? That's a good sign right there, because now you've got somebody who's selecting the different styles of Cabernet. And one of the things people need to keep in mind is things like Pinot Noir and Chardonnay. There are so many different expressions of those grapes
Oh,
that you
yeah.
can't just say Chardonnay.
know.
I mean, most people, yes, a lot of people when they're saying Chardonnay around here, they mean California Chardonnay.
Buttery and oaky.
Well, so 10 years ago they would have meant buttery and oaky.
Yeah.
Not so much anymore. A lot of
Well,
people
that's good to
now,
know.
what's trendy right now is lighter oak or less oak and a little more appley or
Nice.
and,
It's about time.
it depends on what you like, and depends on what you're eating too.
Yeah.
If you're having lobster, I'd go with the buttery
Buttery
and
and
oaky one.
Well,
but
that's a good
but
point.
that's me.
Yeah.
But it's
So let's. spread some love. We have guests from throughout this area, and or at least who spend time in this area. So is there a wine shop or two that you could share that you think would be a great place to discover some new and interesting wines in New Hampshire that you would suggest people go to?
Less so up in this area.
Less so up in this area. Actually, I don't know if you've been to the wine shop down the road, just down a block or two.
No,
Carlin's. You should go to Carlin's, and I'd be interested to get your thoughts on them. They're really trying to raise the bar in this area.
So when did they open?
Very small last year.
Yeah, because that's
Very small, very unique wines. They're really trying to bring in wines that you can't get anywhere else. They're one of those places.
So that sounds like the right kind of place.
And I would say, without and the experiences that I've had personally at Carlin's has always been positive. So I would say right out of the gate that would be a great place to go. But beyond that, and there aren't very many because it's hard to make it in the wine world.
There aren't.
in this state.
Wait, what's the secret to making a small fortune in wine?
Yeah, start with
Start
a
with
little.
a
Start with a
large
big one, yeah. It's true in New Hampshire. There's just, and my familiarity is really 4 years ago now. Because,
Sure.
I mean, I
But
was,
there's some long-standing shops that have been in this
but a lot of them went out of business
in 2020.
because of COVID,
Yeah.
and a couple went out before that, but a lot of them went out because of COVID, and then COVID is one of the big factors in why I decided to wind down my business,
Right.
because it also hit the restaurants so hard too.
Yeah, exactly.
And so if you're dealing with the independent shops and the restaurants and they're all going out of business,
Well, and the New Hampshire State liquor store system discourages the small wine shop. It makes it really hard for the small wine shop because, again,
makes
the
it hard for
price.
the restaurants too. But,
And
for the
exactly,
restaurants,
yeah.
yeah.
So it's understandable.
But-
why.
but so,
They
so
maintain their
there used to
control.
be, I mean, there are a couple of shops in Portsmouth.
Yep.
There are, I mean, the one that used to be in the town where I live isn't there anymore. There's one in Nashua that's very good. There's one in Concord that's pretty good.
What are
So
the
Concord's
names?
probably,
You
there's a wine on
share
Main,
the names.
Wine on Main in Concord.
Yeah.
I would give them a check out.
Great.
Wine Nut Boutique in Nashua.
Yep.
Over in Portsmouth, there are a couple different ones there, but the one I recommend, and they're not as big, but they have some very interesting stuff, is South Street and Vine,
I've been there, yeah.
which is a little,
Very
and
small.
they're a good cheese shop as well.
Yes.
A little off the beaten path.
They're down like a little alley, right?
Well, they're down, no, that's Corks and Curds that's down a little alley.
Oh,
They're on-
yeah.
They're on Commercial Alley, and Corks and Curds has some interesting ones too.
Yeah.
And the nice thing is a Tretzy right across the street, which one of the great things about them is they're tasting a huge selection of wine almost all the time, which they can do because they're in the middle of the tourist
Yep,
district
yep.
in Portsmouth, and
Yeah.
that's part of their part of their business is to do that.
Sure.
So you can go in there, and they typically have 20 or 30 bottles open at any time.
So how about a restaurant? We said the Squam Lake Inn. Is there another restaurant in New Hampshire that you would, if you really want to be wined and dined, where would you go?
So I would go to Portsmouth.
Yep.
And I would go to either Cava
Yep.
or to the Black Trumpet.
Excellent. Well, both good choices.
And
And their wine menus are carefully selected.
yes,
Yeah.
and yeah, they have very knowledgeable wine people, and there are some other good ones, but those really stand out. Is those two restaurants? They focus on having eclectic selections, and good stuff, and they do a lot available by the glass. Not everything. Cava does quite a bit by the glass. Black Trumpet less so, but you can have a very detailed conversation in either restaurant with somebody who knows a lot about wine and help you pick the wine. So
Yeah. That's great. I mean, I love wine, and obviously I drink our wine, but I drink wines from around the world. We drink wines. We are always excited.
yeah.
Ken and I are always talking, and when we share dinner together, we bring wines to each other's homes that are different from what we're making here, obviously, because if you love wine, there's just, as we said, tens of thousands, millions of choices to choose
Ocean of
from.
wine
There's an
out there.
ocean of wine. So it is. I mean, that needs to be part of the conversation. I think is that we need to talk about the fact that there's so many wonderful options out there, and the more we can do to help everybody understand that, I think it's a good thing for everybody.
Yeah.
I always say to all of our guests also, the best wines in the world are to be found 50 miles from where they're made. And it has to do with that idea that most wine shops are small, most wine shops are only distributing within their region. And I've personally experienced this because as we travel the world, when we go to South Africa and we have this rather poor understanding of what a South African wine is, and then we land there and start consuming wines from little tiny little wineries and go, wow, this is really interesting. And I guess, I say the best wines in the world, it's also about when you go to that little wine shop. I think about that wine shop that
The veterinarian?
the veterinarian,
Yes.
yeah. And it was just like a little hole in the wall place.
Yeah.
Best wines, not best wines, I don't know. Most unique and interesting experience drinking wine that I've had in years. It was such a great experience because he was making wine from the heart. He's making 100 cases or 1,000 cases or 2,000 cases, whatever it was. And he didn't care about, he was not trying to get rich on wine.
I was on the most heartbreaking experiences in selecting wines. It was at this event in Chicago, and I'm meeting with a Spanish winemaker who was probably my dad's age, and he doesn't speak English very well, so he's got probably his granddaughter there translating for him, and he's got these gorgeous red Spanish wines that, I mean, they're the kind of stuff you can put down for 20 years, and it's just going to be fabulous. And I loved them, and I just said, look, I can't sell these. I can't sell these in New Hampshire because I can't store them for the 20 years. And there's just not the market there. He's like, do you like the wine? Do you like the wine? I said, I love the wine. But I know he's a small producer, and he's gone to this event to try and build up his business. And I'm saying, you need to find, New York, Chicago,
Right.
San Francisco. Those are the market, Miami. Those are the
Hampshire's
markets you
not
can
it.
take these wines, because people are not going to spend $70, $100 for one of these bottles that they have to sit on for 10 years. They're not going to do it.
Right.
Not in New Hampshire. You need to find a different market for it. And I mean, I wish I could have put down a couple of cases of his wine, but couldn't. So.
Yeah. No, that's true. So we're at the end of our hour, which is always amazing to me how quickly we get there. But would there be any parting words for somebody out there in our audience who's looking to discover something special, something unique? Is there something you can add to the story that might help somebody who wants to really discover great wine in New Hampshire?
I think the best way to do it is to search out some of those independent wine shops, those smaller wine shops. So you've got one down here. A lot of these wine shops, they will do tastings either Thursday night, Friday night, Saturday afternoon. The schedule changes, but search them out, and they're free tastings. And yes, you're part of the deal is you should buy something from them because they're running a business. But they're not going to require you to pay for the tasting. Nope. Some of the shops do run classes that will, that are paid classes that will get in more depth on a subject, and you can look at some of those. But you can learn a lot at the free tastings. The tastings usually have a representative from either the broker or the winery there to tell you more about the wine, and just be open to trying different stuff, because there are wines out there that you don't know you like yet.
That's right.
And you will like them, but you just don't know it yet because you haven't tried them. So.
Quick story, I went to Carlin's last year, and they had a Friday night tasting, and I went and participated, and the winemaker was there from Italy. And I said, wow, that's fantastic. I'm going to Italy in a few months. And he gave me his card, and I tried the wine, and it was delicious. And so when we were in Italy, I called the number on the card, and it was fabulous. He remembered the story. He remembered me from here, and invited me to the winery, and my wife and I spent a half a day.
Oh yeah,
touring his
that's what
winery.
those turned into.
Yeah, it was a fantastic relationship, and they were just overjoyed that we came from the U.S. to go see them from the tasting that we did here at Garland's, and so that is a unique experience, and one you can have if you go out and enter this
You
into this
can.
world. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, thank you so much
Yeah.
You're welcome.
for joining us. This is a great conversation. It could go on for me.
Oh,
It
yeah,
could
that's
continue to go
amazing.
on for hours. 'Cause
Yeah.
you have a really great knowledge of wine, and you have a really great understanding of the industry in a way that I don't. And there is a mystique that for the novice that is hard to uncover. It's
crack,
hard to
yeah.
really.
Yeah. If you feel that way, look at beer now. And I don't know anybody who's not comfortable about beer. I mean, they may not like it, but they're not afraid of beer.
Sure.
But then you go into the beer stores these days and you look, and there are
It's a bit
hundreds.
overwhelming.
Dizzying.
Yeah, I mean, how do you solve the problem? You just go try them. Because if you like beer, you just go try them.
And on that note, just go try them. Thank you, everybody, for spending another Monday night with us. We really appreciate it, and I hope you enjoyed the show. And we will look forward to seeing you again next Monday. And we don't have a topic yet, but we'll figure that out, as you know. And we'll see you next week. So thank you for coming, and have a good night.